Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to part two of me critiquing Part of the Problem by Dave Smith. It's episode 1415. It's called You're All a Bunch of Socialists. It's kind of Dave Smith expressing his economic views. They're Austrian style economics. So if you're not familiar with that, that is what I'm going to be getting into as well, but you can also just look it up yourself if you're not sure, if you want more information.
Transactions are voluntary or they are not. There is a difference between buying something in the store and getting mugged. And government is an instrument of force. This is also just objective.
Okay, yeah. So he talks about government is an instrument of force. It is. It will always be, always. And that is why Austrian economics, if brought to its full realization, wouldn't work, because people organize themselves through government, through hierarchical systems. That's what humans do. And the idea behind Austrian economics is that you wouldn't have that. That's why it pairs so well with libertarianism, where libertarianism is, hey, you do you, we're all just kind of free living in this world, no one's anybody's enemy. That's just not realistic. It depends on if you're a realist or if you're a liberalist. This is getting into political science kind of terminology, but a realist is focused on how people have power and their power relative to others. And a liberalist would say, are we doing better than yesterday, kind of thing, for a quick nutshell of an explanation to there. So yeah, governments are force. They will always be. And let's just take this, because this is where Austrian economics and Ludwig von Mises actually admits it fails. Because if you take it to its completion, where you say, hey, let's just say the United States of America is fully Austrian economics, fully libertarian, and we don't really have a government because government is coercion, and we don't like that here. Well, unless the rest of the world gets on board with that, the United States of America is just going to be this other country that takes us over. There is no defense because you can't pay for defense. There's no military because, well, I don't want to pay for military. It's a public good. It's one of the best examples of a public good with free rider, the free rider problem. Austrian economics, there are things in Austrian economics that are fundamental to other branches and other studies of economics. That's true. These extreme views that Dave Smith is kind of talking about here, they don't actually work in reality. You could not have a system function this way. You couldn't have a government. You just get taken over by anyone who instantly doesn't want to do that and just goes, hey, I just want to work with this other person. And we formed a group, and then we brought more people into our group. And now I'm kind of the leader because I know the plan. And we kind of formed our own little tribe, and we're going to take your resources because we know what's best to do with them, not you. You might think you do. Any of this, I'm just describing how like a government would be formed over time. Even if you reset the whole world and everyone in the whole world was Austrian economics, there would eventually just be people who want more or who have ill intentions. How do you account for them in Austrian economics? How do you account for these people who don't want to transact with mutual benefit, who want to take and cost nothing to them? I think this is something that gets overlooked because it is the more, and it's not like extreme as in like, oh my goodness, you're so extreme and crazy. It's just the extreme wing of Austrian economics, which isn't really that extreme in the sense of like, it's an extremely peaceful proposition, but it's not realistic. It couldn't function in real life. Yeah, it doesn't work. The whole gambit behind Austrian economics is that government can only function through coercion, which is true, yes, but it ignores the benefits that you get from the protections of your government versus other governments. You don't get killed by other governments, supposedly, as long as you're not going to war with each other. This is the whole thing of like coercion and violence. It's pro-capitalism, which is fine, and it's anti-government intervention. And so that's why it's so anti-communism and anti-socialism, because there's government intervention in those government structures of communism and socialism, in those quasi-economic structures. That's why Austrian economics pushes so hard against them. I would say, realistically, capitalism has failures and capitalism has faults in it. that socialism can quite nicely catch. And if you had a mix of capitalism and socialism to kind of get the better of both worlds and say, hey, we don't like this about socialism, we're not going to do it because we make the government, we set the rules. We don't like this about capitalism, so we're not going to do it because we make the rules. Another thing that's kind of bad with Austrian economics that hyper capitalists really jump onto is the idea of regulation. There has to be oversight. You can't just, oh, I'll regulate myself. You're just going to do what you want. And because Austrian economics holds things that the government does as violence and coercion, regulation is therefore violent and coercive. And if you got rid of regulation, you'd be fine and everything would be great and dandy. And that is just not true. That is just, it's not true. There's lots of payout for regulation where you have better food standards. Milk, way back in the day, like ranchers and farmers, to stretch the milk, they'd put chalk in it and stuff to try to get it to look whiter and nicer. Like, they don't care. They were looking for profits. So the idea that a profit-driven incentive is the only incentive you can have, and it is the true incentive, and it is the one way to follow, is nonsense. And to have an ideology where there's like one answer is, it should be a red flag for most people. To just be like, oh, that's a red flag. Like, you believe in this one thing on all circumstances. You have no room for grays on this or that or gray area, but you want to say that, oh, maybe there will be a little bit of gray area here or there, but largely speaking, there is no gray area. Maybe you shouldn't say that. Maybe you should just say, yeah, I like the idea of a profit-driven motive, but I know it fits most, not fits all. Kind of like those clothes at Walmart now, where it fits most instead of one size fits all, one size fits most. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there with Austrian economic belief and how it would function in reality versus theoretically. And again, like I said, there's lots of good stuff in Austrian economics that is actually part of neoclassical economics and whatnot. But there are things in Austrian economics that just don't apply. They're kind of ridiculous. The framing goes, oh, wouldn't you like a government that wouldn't exact violence on you if you didn't do what it said? Yes, me personally, I would like to not have violence done to me if, say, I missed paying my taxes. Also, if there was a criminal, or well, I guess there wouldn't be criminals in this world because there wouldn't be a government, but let's just try to stay with this. If there was a criminal and they didn't pay their taxes and my whole town suffers because they were supposed to pay a big chunk of it because they make a big chunk of money, and now my whole town can't afford the whole project that they were going to do. They got to push it back until they can tax us poorer people more or more frequently. Then yeah, I'd be kind of be like, hey, get that guy, get him to pay his taxes. I paid mine. I'm part of a society. I have neighbors and public roads and public fire and all this stuff. Why are they not paying? And I think that's the real thing that a lot of Americans are asking for, is to pay your fair share, is what they say all the time. And a lot of people go, what is it? What is a fair share? What even is it? We don't need to reestablish what the fair share is. What we need to do is get rid of all the loopholes for all the wealthy elite people who can just write off, oh, I built a warehouse 5 years ago, I'm going to deduct that off my taxes. I employed my son and my grandson and my nephew and my 20 other family members, so I'm going to take that off my taxes. I don't know tax code. I'm just giving broad examples, okay? So like, my examples could be wrong. But there's a ton of loopholes and tax code cuts that very wealthy people can use to gain advantage of the system, where there's not many options for poorer people or just average income Americans to do that. So they end up getting saddled with more taxation than the wealthy. Not in absolute terms, not in absolute dollars, but by percentage of income. So if by percentage of my income, the effective tax rate on me is 26%, then I would imagine that someone who makes 600 times the amount I make should probably have the equal effective tax on them, or higher, not lower. Definitely not lower, at least equal. If I'm paying 26% effective tax rate, the billionaire should pay 26% effective tax rate on them. That's typically not what we're seeing. The argument about what is our fair share, what is the fair share, what does that even mean? It's about the effective tax rate, from what I gather. People are tired of having to pay a higher tax rate and a higher effective tax rate who make less than people who make more than them by miles are paying a lower effective tax rate. And then they use that to then pay less even next time and next time. And they literally will have scores of lawyers on retainer to fight the IRS. If the IRS were to ever go, hey, I don't think this is right, let's litigate this, it's not cost effective for the IRS. The IRS will just lose tons of money. So who do they go after? The people who don't have money for teams of lawyers. Anyways, sorry, I get on tangents and then I just like lose my train of thought sometimes. It's a bad argument in my opinion when it comes to this idea of you can only see it in black and white. You can only see it as you're either pro-capitalism and you hate socialism, you hate communism, or you're pro-communism, you hate socialism, you hate capitalism, or you're pro-socialism, you hate the other two. My belief is that we should run with a capitalist system, a capitalist market system, have socialism as a safety net for our society, because I believe in America and I love the idea of America being a great place to live and a lot of Americans being able to thrive and grow in America and not being shamed to, oh, you can't afford it, move out, go live somewhere else. It's like, fuck you, this is my country. Don't tell me to leave and go live somewhere else. So again, this nonsense of an ideology of it has to be this way, it's black and white, those are red flags. And again, I don't think a lot of people in America, a lot of Americans are actually asking for something that's actually radical or extreme. It's just being framed as radical or extreme because the people who benefit now from the current structure don't want it to change. You know, if you're currently making $100 a minute, not that you shouldn't be making $100 a minute and that I'm going to determine what you make, but I want to change the rules so that I have a way to get in there and compete against you. And that leads to the potential of you earning less than $100 a minute. They don't like that. That's the real argument. Not that, hey, I want to take your money and just for taking it for taking's sake and shame on you for having money. That's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is let people compete. Let there be competition. Break up the monopolies. Break up Google. Break up Meta. Like, stop letting these massive, already well-to-do companies just buy out other companies because they can't compete. Frickin' Facebook bought Instagram because Instagram was beating Facebook at its own game. So what'd they do? Did they compete? Did they roll up their sleeves and go, oh, this is capitalism, we got to be competitive? No, because that would drive down prices. And driving down prices would drive down shareholder value. So instead, they just bought them. And then that increased shareholder value. This is where the incentive structures get twisted and wrong, and they don't always work for what's best for our society and our economy as a whole, but they'll work for a big corporation, and then that corporation will spend lots of money to say that I am the vast majority of your economy. And my practices are common practices that everyone should do and could do or would do if they could. And therefore I am fine, and you should not look at me with any kind of scrutiny. This is where Austrian economics, I believe, falls short because it is a laissez-faire style economics. They don't want government intervention because government intervention is coercion. It is violence at every level all the time. It's just, to me, it's a little bit nonsensical because it's too idealistic and it's too black and white.
If you have scarcity of something, if your country is not able to produce steel, you actually want steel to be expensive. You want steel to be expensive because that lets you know there's not a lot of it. It lets entrepreneurs know, don't make a lot of plants. Don't make a big project based around using a lot of steel because there isn't that much of it. You know what ends up happening when you fuck with that signal? Oh, we're going to artificially make steel really cheap. Entrepreneurs plan a big project around using a lot of steel. Then they get halfway through and realize they don't have the rest of it.
Okay, so Dave Smith's example there is a little, it's kind of a bad example. And I know it seems like he's just talking off of the cuff. You know, if you were to have scarcity of steel and then that's reflected in prices, I understand that and I agree with it. You don't want to mess with prices as much as you can not mess with prices is ideally what you want to do so that we can have clearer and clean signals. So we know, oh, this is this and that is that. To an extent, there's lots of exceptions. This is a poor example because if you artificially make steel cheap, you're no longer scarce on steel. His example says that you've artificially made steel cheap. Now, what's important about this is that the way he's framed this is not a catch-all. Did you make the steel artificially cheap by providing grants or subsidies to purchasers of steel? Then you could run out of steel domestically. You could buy it internationally too, though. And those grants and subsidies, the money that was given to those purchasers of steel will just go to those international companies and get your steel. Did you artificially decrease the price of steel because the government set a price cap on steel? Or did the government buy a stock of steel and sells it at a discount? These are different methods to accomplish artificial price adjustments, or to artificially adjust the price. It's important because one scenario, you could run out of steel, but the more likely scenario is that the cost of steel is shifted from the business owner and the entrepreneur to the government. And the government is funded by taxes and fees. So the cost of steel is really shifted to the people that our government is supposed to actually, for the people, by the people. So I think this is a poor example because he's trying to showcase how if you mess with price signals, you could run into a situation where your resource is more scarce. But the reality of what he's described, depending on which route you take, if it's a grant, it's a subsidy, it's a stockpile, if the government bought it or what, is more realistically just going to shift the cost of that steel towards someone who has nothing to do with that steel. And that is what we see in America today. Look at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, where the government stockpiles and buys oil. That whole thing is the government involved in the market and then selling it back out and buying more and contracting through different businesses. So it's not to say that, in my opinion, government is all bad and everything's wrong. It's just to say that there are certain ways to do things. There's more than one way to do it. And the way we choose to do it is really important and can determine the outcome.
The subjective theory of value, the correct theory of value.
Austrian economics is all about the subjective theory of value. I would caution you to fully adopt just that idea, or just the idea of labor theory of value. They are actually shared. The two theories are the two sides of the same coin. They need each other. So let's do a little thought experiment. Now, let's, on one hand, do labor theory of value. And on the other hand, we'll do subjective theory of value. If you did your economy only on the subjective theory of value and no labor, it was just a subjective, what kind of economy would you have? And let's start from the commodity level. You only have commodity goods. You can't add labor because then we would fall into the trap of the labor theory of value. You don't have an economy, do you? The reason subjective theory of value is not absolute and correct is because there is value in labor. There are value added processes that are labor processes. You pretty much just don't have an economy if you don't have labor. Labor creates economy. Like, if you want an economy where you can just pick up sticks and stones, and if an apple falls off a tree and you eat it, sure, because that's the equivalent of an economy without any kind of labor in it. If you remove labor out of an economy, you don't have goods and services. You don't have anything. Even capital goods that were, before they were built, used the labor of people to make them. So take a lathe, for example, like a metal lathe. That's a capital good, right? Well, someone had to build it. Someone had to engineer and design it. So there's labor involved in it. And then it can allow you to build more complex and more interesting things that you can add labor to and adds value to that item. So maybe you have a block of steel, or let's just do bar stock steel. And instead of just having a bar of steel, you can put it in the lathe and you can turn it into something else. And maybe you're making a bunch of like flange faces or something by hand. That's labor. That's value added process. Now, your subjective part plays a role in it because not everyone thinks, regardless of the amount of labor put into something, that labor is equal. And when subjective value and labor value come together, we get prices, and we get those super important little information pieces that Austrian economics and Dave Smith is talking about. So they work together. They're not separate, but you're told that they're separate. And if you read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which is a very old read, lots of old words in there, Doust and dust and whatever, all the hithers and whatever words. If you read it, what Adam Smith is trying to get at is what is the building block of value? What is the thing that creates value? It's labor. It's labor. Labor comes before prices because labor produces goods and services, and prices are important and reflect labor based off of indifferences, utility, and consumer preferences of the purchaser. Whether it's the final purchaser, final consumer end, or intermediate, and hey, I'm going to buy that and turn it into something else and then sell that. It's labor, and it's also subjective. So they work together. I hope I'm explaining this in a way that's palatable to people, because to sit in a camp and say, no, it's only subjective. And what does that bring about? Speculative markets, in my opinion. And to sit in another camp and say, no, it's only labor. What does that bring about? The idea of a stagnated economy that is only going to focus on labor and not about capital and investments and risk and all the different pieces of economics that actually work together to produce prosperity, to produce goods and services widely accessible for people. What we're doing in economics is we're taking, and not just economics, economics is the study of, but we're doing it in business, and we're doing it in economics, and we're doing it when humans interact and economize and share ideas. We're taking scarce and limited resources that have multiple uses, and we are doing what we can to allocate those to their best locations for optimum use, and also trying to reduce their scarcity by saying, wow, we can only drink water out of standing water. And then someone invents a drill and wells and technologies and stuff and goes, oh, well, we can actually drill for water too now. So now we have standing water, which is probably not the best because you're going to get sick if you drink it without purifying it, and filtrations and stuff. And now we also have well water. And then someone else comes by and goes, what if we take some of the ocean water and filter it in such a way that we separate the salts from the ocean water, and then we can drink that water? So we're increasing access to resources. We're unlocking resources and the availability of them to use them to economize, which is what humans do. We economize. Even the ones that don't like to believe it, they do. There are some hardened people who want to reel it way back and go, no, we're going to go back to the barter system. And I'm sorry, but that's not going to work. That ship has sailed, and then it sunk. Same with the gold standard. That ship has sailed, and it also sunk. Probably sunk faster because it was full of gold. I'm just kidding. Ha ha ha. Little analogies and plays on words with puns and stuff.
Buy milk at the store. What do you want to pay for that? Zero. You don't want to pay anything for it. And what does the store owner want from it? I don't know, as much as you're willing to give him. They'd be quite happy if it was $1 million for a quart of milk, right? But what goes on when there's a voluntary system? They can't charge you $1 million because you won't buy it. You have the option not to buy it. So, okay, they bring it back. We're always finding an equilibrium, finding where's high enough that I can maximize my profits, but low enough that they'll still keep coming in and buying it from me.
Okay, so he's talking about milk and the price of milk and how much would the store owner charge you if he could. Oh, maybe $1 million. Yeah, the thing that I think would be beneficial to look at in this scenario, it's a term called elasticity in economics, and how elastic the demand of something can be, or the supply, but let's stick with demand for now. Let's just stay in the realm of necessities, like water. You need water to live. You have to have it. You can't live without it. And the elasticity of water is pretty inelastic. You gotta have it. Now, I think where the argument is missed that Dave Smith is talking about is he's framing all goods and services without considering elasticity of those goods and services. And when you do that, you can get a lot of misconceptions. So if you need water because it's inelastic, because you'll die without it, you're going to pay the price that you have to pay to get it, regardless of coercion and stuff like that. So the big thing with Austrian economics is that the government is coercive. And if there wasn't government, there would be no coercion. And that's just not true, because humans, people interacting with each other, will also be coercive, even if they're not a government. So a corporation, let's just say it monopolized the water supply in your town, and there is no government to stop it from being a monopoly. And they go, I'm going to charge you $1 million for a gallon of water. Now, with Austrian economics, that is still an amicable exchange. That is still, hey, we have no coercion here, so fair is fair. Is it fair for them to take all of one resource, charge a bunch of money for it, and then if you try to steal it, there's no government to put you in jail, but I guarantee you the corporation that owns the water will mess you up or kill you or whatever. This is the wild, wild west now, because there's no entity to prevent malfeasance or misuse or just violence by this. So that's another thing that really falls apart with Austrian economics, is they only frame government, at least from my readings of it, and I have more reading to do, but from my readings of Austrian economics, it's the government that's a problem, and without the government, everyone's hunky-dory happy and free trade is just going to happen. That's not true. This is not true. There will just be someone that is a de facto government. There will just be people or entities that are stronger or have more access to resources or more resources, and they will just take advantage of the ones that don't have it. That's been proven through history, and even when governments exist. And strong governments that are for the people, which is what America's government is supposed to be, will stand up against the corporations that have so many resources and so many avenues to approach when it comes to how they want to get business done. And they will say, no, you can't do that, because our people, the American people, they deserve to have water at a reasonable price, and we will not allow you to monopolize the water. That's what it's supposed to be. That's not what's happening right now. If you like this kind of content and enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more, and then share it with someone else that you think might be interested in economics and want to talk about all the different details and the nuance to it, and not just little clips and little talking points and little gotcha moments. So anyways, thanks for listening.